Welcome. Today's story isn't about success, genius, or billion-dollar deals. It's about grease traps, broken milkshake machines, and polyester uniforms. This is what it was like to be a Burger King manager in the 1980s, and why it absolutely sucked. Being a Burger King manager in the 1980s wasn't glamorous. It was mostly about getting there before everyone else and doing the things no one really noticed. That usually meant arriving well before sunrise, parking behind the building where the light fixtures didn't always work, and letting yourself into a restaurant that had been locked down since midnight. You had keys to many, honestly, the kind with color-coded caps that faded quickly after a few months of pocket wear. You had to remember which key opened what, because none of them were labeled. One was for the back door, another for the office, one for the safe, and a few you didn't even use anymore but kept on the ring, just in case something broke and you needed to override it. Most mornings were routine, no one else around. Just you, the silence, and the faint smell of fryer grease that never completely went away. Even after the night crew mopped and scrubbed everything down, it still lingered. It got into the walls, the uniforms, the air ducts. You got used to it after a few weeks on the job. First thing, you'd walk in through the back, punch in the alarm code, usually something simple like 1234, and flip on the prep area lights. It was fluorescent and harsh, but you stopped noticing that after a while, the kitchen always looked a little off in the morning. Counters wiped down, sure, but maybe someone forgot a spatula or didn't clean under the fry hopper. If it was bad, you'd make a note. If it was minor, you just dealt with it. Opening the store wasn't complicated, but it had to be done a certain way, in a certain order. There was a checklist, usually laminated and stuck on a clipboard, either hanging by the microwave or stuck between stacks of disposable food trays. It told you what to do, even if you already knew. Start the fryer's turn on the heat lamp sprue, the first batch of coffee count, down the registers check stock levels for buns, patties, cheese, lettuce set out, clean trays and lock, the dining room fill ketchup, and mustard dispensers make sure the soda fountains working, and every one of those tasks had little quirks. The fryer took the longest to heat up. If you didn't get that started within the first 10 minutes of arrival, you'd be behind schedule. You'd flip a switch, wait for it to beep, then watch the oil slowly bubble to life. The coffee machine was faster. You dumped pre-measured packs of grounds into the filter basket, added water, and waited for the first pot to fill. You didn't drink much of it. It was usually bitter, but customers expected it. Then came the cash drawers. You'd unlock the safe, pull out the tills, and count everything by hand. Quarters, dimes, bills, stacked and verified. You logged the totals in a little binder that got passed from manager to manager. If someone had been short the night before, you'd have to deal with that later. For now, it just went in the log. Some mornings, the freezers had frost build up around the hinges. You'd kick the bottom of the door just hard enough to break the seal. Inside, everything was stacked and bagged patties, still frozen solid, in boxes labeled flame-broiled beef in blocky red letters. Fries came in heavy paper sacks. The walk-in cooler had bins of shredded lettuce and sliced tomatoes from the night before, some of which had already started to brown around the edges. You didn't have much time to stand around. The goal was to be fully ready by the time the first prep cook showed up, usually someone who had worked the closing shift the night before and was still half asleep when they walked in. You made sure they signed in on the timesheet, asked them to check the temperature on the burger holding station, and hoped they remembered to bring their uniform visor. If they didn't, You had extras in the office, sometimes. An hour before opening, a delivery truck would show up, Cisco or another vendor backing into the lot with that loud hiss of air brakes. You had to sign for the order, make sure nothing was missing, and that they didn't short you on something important like burger wrappers or hash brown sleeves. Then you'd help load boxes into storage. It wasn't in your job description, but if you didn't do it, you'd fall behind. By the time the dining room lights were on and the open sign was flipped, everything had to be set. Napkin dispensers full, drink station wiped down, restrooms checked, not cleaned, but at least checked, soap refilled, trash not overflowing, nothing obviously broken. The goal was to be invisible, for the store to feel like it had always been open, like no one ever had to prepare it. That was your job, to make everything run smoothly without drawing attention to the fact that you were the one holding it together. No one ever really thanked the manager for that. Not the crew, not the district supervisor, not the customers, but if you got it wrong, if you forgot something, if you didn't have enough change in the drawer, or the fryers weren't hot enough when the first customer came in, it was your fault. No question, so you learned not to forget. You learned to keep the checklist in your head even when you weren't looking at it. You learned that opening the store was a quiet hour or two, where you had complete control before the rest of the day started happening to you, and by 10:30, when the doors unlocked, you were already tired. Once the store opened, things shifted. The quiet, controlled rhythm of the morning prep gave way to something more unpredictable. A Burger King manager in the 1980s didn't have the luxury of delegation, not really. You were responsible for everything that happened once those doors unlocked, and everything that didn't happen, too. Customers started trickling in around 10:30. Most came for an early lunch or a quick coffee. A few ordered breakfast, but Burger King wasn't really known for that. Not like McDonald's. Still, the menu was there, so you had to serve it. That meant making sure the egg trays were prepped, the hash browns weren't burned, and the toaster wasn't jammed with leftover sesame seed buns from the night shift. The crew was usually made up of teenagers. Some were reliable, most weren't. You got used to managing a rotating cast of high schoolers who didn't always show up when they were scheduled, and often had other things on their minds. You tried to be fair, but you also learned to have backups ready. At least once a week, someone would call in 5 minutes before their shift. Either they were sick, or their car wouldn't start, or their mum needed the car. You didn't ask questions. You just hung up the phone, marked the schedule, and figured out how to cover their station. You learned quickly that it was faster to do it yourself than to get angry about it. Managing a shift was a constant act of triage. The fryer alarm might start beeping just as a customer was asking why their Whopper didn't come with cheese. The drive-thru would start backing up right as your grill cook disappeared into the walk-in freezer for a suspiciously long inventory check. Someone would overfill a soda cup, spilling sticky cola across the counter, and the ice machine would start making that loud chugging sound it made when it was about to jam. You were expected to stay calm, keep it running, solve things. The headset for the drive-thru crackled constantly. It was a bulky, uncomfortable device with foam padding that always smelled like fryer grease. The speaker wasn't clear. You'd often have to ask customers to repeat themselves 3 times, and even then you weren't totally sure what they said. People weren't patient, especially in cars. You learned how to guess based on tone and rhythm. 2 items and a drink meant a Whopper combo 9 times out of 10. You also had to keep the line moving. Corporate had expectations for ticket times, how fast you could process an order, hand out food, and move to the next car. They weren't suggestions. They were tracked, printed, and compared. You were expected to beat last week's numbers. Always, when things slowed down around 11 o'clock, you took a few minutes to double-check stock. One of your main jobs was inventory, not just counting boxes, but watching how much food was moving and how much waste the crew was producing. If someone dropped a tray of fries, you had to mark it. If the burgers were prepped too early and got dry under the heat lamp, you had to mark that too. Every item lost 8 into your numbers, and your numbers were part of your monthly review. You knew exactly how much each slice of cheese cost, each bun, each ketchup packet. It wasn't that you wanted to think about it, it's just that the system made sure you did. Sometimes, a district manager would drop in unannounced. That was never good. They didn't come to compliment you. They came to check for dust on the fire extinguisher, make sure the crew had proper name tags, and to see if the back office paperwork was up to date. You had to act like you weren't rushing to fix things, even when you were. If they found something wrong, something small, even like a misplaced cleaning log or a cooler that was a few degrees too warm, they'd write it down, note it in the report, and send it up the chain. Enough of those, and your bonus went out the window. That's if you were lucky enough to be in line for a bonus at all. You also had to manage customer complaints. The burgers were cold, the fries were salty, the milkshake machine was out again. Sometimes it was a real problem. Sometimes people just wanted to yell. You kept your voice low, even when theirs went up. You gave them a coupon, maybe a free apple pie, and you made a note so your regional didn't hear about it before you did. All the while, you kept an eye on the clock. Lunch rush was coming. That was when it got serious. You'd check the grill station. Patties needed to be loaded on in batches, rotated properly. Bun toasting station heated. Garnish area stocked lettuce, tomato, pickle, onion, all cold, all fresh, or at least cold enough that cashiers needed to be in place, registers logged in, one person on front counter, one person on drive-through, one floater for cleanup and refill duty. That was usually the new hire. You had to keep an eye on them, too. You weren't just managing food and people, you were managing movement, timing, flow, pressure, and if something broke during that window, if the fryer shut down, if the bun warmer sparked out, if the shake machine jammed, you handled it while still pretending nothing was wrong, because, from the customer's point of view, things were supposed to just work, and from corporate's point of view, you didn't have time to explain. If you asked any manager what the hardest part of the day was, they would say the lunch rush without even thinking about it. Everything else, the morning prep, the late afternoon lull, even the closing shift was manageable. But lunch, especially between 11:45 and 1:30, was where it all either held together or came apart. At first, the customers came in slowly. A few early lunchers looking to beat the crowd. Office workers with exact orders they had memorized. Construction, guys who always asked for large fries but paid in coins. You saw them every day. You recognized the cars before the people walked in. You knew who would complain about pickles, even if the sandwich had none. Who wanted their Whopper fresh every single time. Who wanted no salt on the fries and then asked for salt packets. But once noon hit, it stopped being about individual orders. It became a wall of demand. Customers packed into the dining room. Cars looped around the drive-thru, and the kitchen kicked into full gear. This was when the systems you had in place were tested, whether the prep was done right, whether the team showed up, whether the equipment kept working. You stationed yourself between the kitchen and the counter. From there, you could watch everything. You kept one eye on the grill and one on the monitors, showing the drive-through queue. Orders came in fast. You called out what needed to be made. 6 Whoppers, 2 cheeseburgers, a couple of chicken tenders. The printer at the sandwich board spat out paper tickets constantly. You had to tear them off and organize them, or the crew would lose track. You moved constantly. No part of the store stood still. The cashier needed change because someone paid with a 50-bit fryer basket got dropped too hard and splashed oil. The shake machine had a blinking light that could mean anything from low mix to total failure. A kid spilled orange soda all over the tile floor and his mother wanted someone to mop it up immediately. You couldn't do everything yourself, but you had to make sure everything got done. If the drive-through line hit a standstill, you stepped over and helped bag. If someone walked out of the dining room with a tray full of food, you checked to make sure the receipt was paid. Theft was a quiet problem no one liked to talk about. Most of the time, the issues weren't dramatic. They were small, constant interruptions. The register froze and had to be rebooted by unplugging it. A tomato bin ran empty and someone had to slice more in the back. The crew member slicing tomatoes would use a dull knife, which meant the slices were too thick, which meant the sandwiches got sloppy, which meant someone would complain. You made mental notes of everything. What needed to be reordered? Who needed more training? Which piece of equipment was going to give out soon? You wrote things down on little yellow slips. Sometimes just keywords like ice chute, Jeff freezer door, or replace mop heads. You slipped them into your vest pocket and hoped to deal with them later. Lunch also meant numbers. The register kept a tally of how many customers came through, how much was spent, how many combos were sold. There were charts posted in the office, showing what corporate expected. You knew the targets: sales per hour, customers per half hour, average transaction value. The district manager might call in the middle of the rush to ask how it was going. You gave short answers. You had no time for long explanations. You kept the crew moving. You gave instructions that were short and direct. More fries. 2 Whoppers down. Restock lids. Clock in first. Where is your name tag? It was also hot. The kitchen had poor airflow, and during peak periods it got uncomfortably warm. The heat from the fryers and broilers built up fast. Even the fans overhead just pushed the warm air around. Your uniform would cling slightly to your back by noon. The air smelled like oil and beef and steam. Everything had a layer of moisture on it: your forehead, the counter, even the plastic ketchup dispensers. And through all of this, you had to stay visible. That was part of the job. Be on the floor. Be seen. Solve problems. Customers looked for someone with a different uniform when they were upset. You had to be calm, even when the order was wrong and the customer was already angry. You didn't take breaks during lunch. You barely drank water. You ate, if at all, standing up by the microwave in the back with a lukewarm sandwich someone wrapped for you. By the time the lunch rush started to die down, around 1:30, the crew would be worn out. You were too. Voices got shorter. Movements slower. The dining room had empty trays left behind. The floors needed sweeping. The bathrooms needed checking again. But you couldn't relax just yet. You had to transition from chaos to clean up. And you had to do it without losing momentum. The post-lunch lull was a strange time. Not quiet, but quieter. And it always came with a kind of weight. Like something had passed through and left a layer of exhaustion behind. You checked the schedule again. Logged a few waste items. counted the till, thought about the next shift, and hoped nothing major broke before dinner. After the intensity of the lunch rush, there was a narrow window to reset. Not rest, reset. You had maybe 40 minutes to an hour before the after-school crowd started rolling in, and during that time, a Burger King manager in the 1980s had more to do than people realized. The first thing you did was walk the floor, not with a clipboard or anything dramatic, just a slow check of the dining room. Tables that needed wiping, stray wrappers left behind, napkin dispensers that were already half empty. You grabbed a wet rag from the prep area, not particularly clean, and wiped surfaces as you passed them. One eye on the front counter, one eye on the crew. The afternoon crew was trickling in. They were mostly teenagers coming off a school day, backpacks in the break area, uniforms pulled out of duffel bags, sometimes wrinkled, sometimes unwashed. A few of them arrived late or not at all. If they were more than 10 minutes late, you had to write it down. If they skipped entirely, you had to make a note on their time card and adjust the labor chart. You knew most of them by name, not just first names, but what classes they took, what bands they liked, who was dating who. It was part of the job. You didn't have to care, but it made it easier if you did. You gave the same instructions almost every day. Clock in before you touch anything. Wash your hands. Grab a headset. Check the prep chart. And every day, someone would skip one of those steps. You learned not to yell. Just redirect. Calm and clear. Always calm and clear. Then came inventory. You walked the back room and the coolers, checking what had run low during lunch. Sometimes it was buns, sometimes it was condiments. More often it was the small things that made a big difference when they ran out. Salt packets, napkin refills, apple pies. You made notes for the next truck order. You checked the delivery slip from the last one to make sure you actually got what was billed. If not, you'd have to call the supplier. And if the supplier could not fix it that week, you had to find a workaround. Most of the time, that meant borrowing from another store. You would call the nearest location and ask if they could spare a case of chicken patties or a bottle of fry oil. Then you would send one of your crew to go pick it up, if someone had a car. Meanwhile, the back office always needed attention. The desk was small, pressed into the corner near the safe. There was usually a time card machine bolted to the wall, with a slot that stamped each employee's punch with a loud, mechanical thunk. On the desk were shift logs, temperature charts, labor schedules, and the maintenance book. If something broke that day, it needed to be logged there, not just for records, but so you could prove you were doing your job when someone from above came asking why the toaster was still broken a week later. There was also the waste log. Everything that got thrown away had to be written down. You used a separate sheet just for that. Burnt patties, dropped buns, milk that expired, fries that sat too long under the lamp. Each one had a code. You circled the reason, then wrote the quantity. At the end of the week, that total went into your monthly performance report. All of this while keeping one ear open for the bell above the front door. One customer could turn the room from quiet to busy again. A school bus stopping nearby would flood the restaurant with 10 or 15 kids at once. You had to be ready. The afternoon was also when maintenance issues surfaced. The dishwasher might start backing up, the freezer door might not seal completely, or the bathroom sink might clog again. You had to deal with it, not by fixing it yourself necessarily, but by calling the right vendor, making the report, and making sure your team worked around the issue. In a perfect world, you would have an assistant manager to help with all this. Sometimes you did. Sometimes you were that assistant. It depended on the day and how the schedule was written. But even when help was available, you were expected to be the one who knew everything, where the spare aprons were kept, how to restart the register if it froze, what to do when the shake machine gave error code 3 again. The crew asked you things all day. Can they switch shifts next week? Can they clock out early? Can they take their break now? Can they take 2? Can they eat a free burger today instead of half off? You answered those questions without pausing whatever else you were doing. The afternoon also meant paperwork. You had to complete midday counts, log sales numbers, and make sure that the till matched what the register said. If it did not, you had to figure out why. If someone gave the wrong change earlier, or hit the wrong key, or let a customer walk away with food they did not pay for, it came out of that total dot. And if the draw was off by more than a few dollars, you would hear about it. By 4 o'clock, the pace started to shift again. It was no longer just recovery from lunch. It was preparation for dinner. The cycle began to repeat, and if you were still on shift, that meant you had to do it all over again. By 5 p.m., the dinner rush was underway. Unlike lunch, which felt sharp and chaotic, dinner was broader. It lasted longer. Families came in slowly, staggered across a few hours. People got off work, picked up food for the household, sat down for dine-in if they had time. The mood was different, not slower, but heavier. You had to make sure the kitchen stayed clean while still in use. During lunch, you could let things slide until the rush ended, not at dinner. You had to clean as you went because there was no second reset coming. This was the end stretch. What got messy now stayed messy until close. The staff on duty was usually a mix. 1 or 2 from the earlier shift overlapping with new arrivals. Some of them were sharper in the evening, others were barely functioning. A few had been at school all day, then clocked in here for 6 hours. You could see the fatigue in their posture, in the way they moved slower with each order. You felt it yourself, but you could not afford to slow down yet. There were different types of customers in the evening. Older couples who asked for things a certain way and expected to be heard. Parents managing 3 kids with sticky fingers and high expectations. Teenagers hanging around too long, not buying much, playing with the ketchup pumps. A few regulars coming in for the same order they always got. You greeted them by name when you could. It made things smoother. If there was a mistake, people were less forgiving at night. It was dinner. They were tired. So were you. But again, you had to absorb it. Stay professional. Replace the item. Apologize without sounding scripted. You learned how to de-escalate things quickly. Free fries went a long way. A calm tone mattered more than getting the details perfect. By this point in the day, equipment failures became more likely. If something had been borderline all day, it was now about to break. The ice machine started to sputter. The soda nozzles got sticky. The shake machine was running low on mix. The fryer oil was darkening and needed to be changed, but you could not shut it down yet. Not until things slowed. If you were the closing manager, you had a new list to worry about. Prep for tomorrow, final inventory, cleaning tasks. There was a checklist posted on the backroom wall. Closeout cash procedures, equipment shutdowns, restocking freezer items for the morning crew, sanitizing everything. Floors had to be swept and mopped, grease traps emptied, bathrooms cleaned again. The night crew often had the least experience. You had to keep after them. If someone went outside to smoke and did not come back for 20 minutes, you had to chase them down. If someone decided to take out the trash but forgot to lock the back door. You had to correct it. Security was your job too. Managers had to make sure the building was sealed at the end of the night, windows locked, alarms set, deposit made. The deposit had to be counted and bagged before you left. That meant taking all the cash from the day, reconciling each drawer, and logging the totals. You did this in the back office, usually while also answering crew questions or checking on a machine one last time. The deposit was sealed in a bag, labeled, and dropped in the safe. Then you logged it in a binder with the date and your initials. You also had to fill out the end-of-day report. It included the total sales, total labor hours, food cost estimate, waste totals, and notes about anything unusual. The carbon copy went to your district manager. It was part of your performance tracking. If you made mistakes on that sheet, someone would call you the next morning. Once the dining room emptied, you let the crew wind down. You reminded them to clean their stations. You reminded them again 10 minutes later. And again after that. You checked their work. You re-wiped the spots they missed. You scrubbed the grill yourself if you had to. You checked the bathrooms a final time and restocked toilet paper if it was low. It was never just one thing. It was everything. By the time the last customer left and the lights were dimmed, it was often after midnight, sometimes later. Your shift had started 12 or 13 hours earlier. You did not sit down for more than a few minutes the entire time. You barely ate. You had answered dozens of questions, handled multiple small crises, and worked through more grease than anyone outside the building would ever know. Before you left, you turned off the kitchen lights. You walked through the dining room one last time, made sure no chairs were left down. The soda machine was wiped. The registers were powered off. You locked the doors, set the alarm, stepped into the parking lot under a flickering security light. There were no thanks, no applause, no one to say you did a good job today. You just got in your car and drove home. Clothes still smelling like fryer oil, hands slightly raw from sanitizer, brains still thinking about the next shift. Whether you had enough patties in the walk-in, whether you wrote down the prep numbers for Friday, you did it because it was your job, and because it would all happen again. The next day, before there were laminated checklists on prep station clipboards, or polyester uniforms with embroidered name tags, there was just a building, a machine, and an idea. Burger King started in 1953, not as a national icon, but as an experimental restaurant concept in Jacksonville, Florida. It was called Instaburger King, not a catchy name, but one that reflected its focus on speed and innovation. At the time, the American fast food model was just beginning to form. Drive-ins and car hops still dominated, and most quick meals were associated with roadside diners or short order counters. McDonald's had started standardizing burger production, but the idea of replicating a single process across multiple cities still seemed bold. The co-founders of Instaburger King, Keith Kramer and Matthew Burns, wanted to build something scalable, something faster than anything else on the market. Their solution was a cooking device called the Instabroiler, a vertical cooking chamber that used forced heat to cook multiple patties at once without needing constant flipping or attention. It was supposed to be more efficient, more consistent, and cheaper to operate than a traditional flat-top grill. The name of the restaurant came directly from the name of the machine. The concept was simple: instant burgers, cooked the same way every time. The early locations were small. They were meant to be fast and functional, not comfortable. There were counters and stools, basic tile floors, narrow prep areas, and compact fry stations. Kitchens were cramped and poorly ventilated. There was no air conditioning in most of them. The menu was limited to just a few items: burgers, fries, soft drinks, milkshakes. Everything had to be cheap, quick, and predictable. But the technology failed them. The Instabroiler, despite being clever in design, did not hold up to the daily demands of restaurant work. It broke down often. It overheated. It cooked inconsistently. The volume it was supposed to handle never quite matched the expectations in practice. Many franchisees became frustrated. Some locations closed. Momentum slowed. By 1954, the idea of building a national brand around the Instabroiler was in question. That same year, two men from Miami, James Miclemore and David Edgerton, purchased the rights to open a franchise location. Both men had business experience. Miclemore had attended Cornell's School of Hotel Administration. Edgerton had restaurant experience. Unlike many early franchisees who were hoping to own a business and walk away from operations, these two intended to run the location themselves. When they discovered the limits of the Instabroiler, they did not give up. Instead, they redesigned it. They developed a new piece of equipment, a continuous chain flame broiler that cooked patties horizontally across open gas flames. It was a breakthrough. More reliable, more scalable. It produced that familiar flame-grilled texture and smell that would become Burger King's signature. Customers responded immediately. The new cooking method delivered on consistency and flavor. Miclemore and Edgerton began opening new locations across South Florida. By 1957, they had introduced what would become their flagship product, the Whopper. At the time, fast food burgers were still relatively small, 3 inches in diameter, thin, with minimal toppings. The Whopper was different. A quarter-pound patty, lettuce, tomato, pickles, ketchup, onions, and mayonnaise, all served on a larger, toasted sesame seed bun. It was branded as a premium product, bigger, better, and more satisfying than what the competition offered. They priced it at 37 cents, which was slightly more than a standard burger. But customers were willing to pay for the size. They also changed the name of the company. They dropped the Instar from 1957 onward. It was simply Burger King. It was simpler, easier to market. The logo was redesigned. The restaurant layout was adjusted to make room for larger prep areas. Dining rooms were added. The brand started to take shape. Expansion continued through the late 1950s and early 1960s. New locations were opened across Florida and then into neighboring states. Each one required sourcing equipment, training staff, securing ingredients, and working with local suppliers. The broiler system was shipped in pieces and had to be assembled and maintained by each store. Manuals were printed. Training procedures were written by hand, duplicated, and mailed to franchisees. It was not yet the digital, top-down system that would come later. At this stage, the company was still close-knit. Managers were trained directly by executives or senior franchise owners. There was very little corporate distance between the store level and the ownership. By 1961, the company had begun expanding further into the Southeast and parts of the Midwest. The pace was increasing, but the capital was limited. Each location took effort. Some stores were built from scratch. Others were converted from diners or failed restaurants. The company had fewer than 100 locations by the early 1960s. Miclemore and Edgerton knew that if they wanted to compete with McDonald's, whose franchise model had been aggressively growing under Ray Kroc, they would need serious backing. In 1967, Burger King was sold to the Pillsbury Company. At the time, Pillsbury was a food industry giant, best known for flour, baking mixes, and refrigerated dough. It had been in business since the 1800s. Pillsbury was looking to expand into fast food, following a trend of food conglomerates acquiring quick-service restaurant brands. They had the capital and logistics expertise to grow Burger King quickly. The sale changed the company fundamentally. Pillsbury's management style was corporate, structured, and analytics-driven. They introduced standardized forms, performance reviews, quarterly targets, and regional management layers. They began hiring professional executives to oversee Burger King operations rather than restaurant veterans. While Miclemore and Edgerton initially stayed on, they had limited control. Within a few years, both men were gone. Burger King was now owned and operated by people who had never flipped a burger or worked a drive-through window. But the Pillsbury era also brought rapid growth. Marketing budgets increased. Franchising accelerated. Supplier networks were scaled. Uniforms were standardized. New architectural templates were introduced for building design. Stores now followed a consistent layout from the counter to the prep line to the freezer. Manuals were rewritten. Employee handbooks printed in bulk. Performance tracking systems were implemented across all stores by the early 1970s. The foundation for what would become the Burger King managerial system of the 1980s was largely in place. Managers were now responsible not just for running a shift, but for executing a corporate blueprint, training schedules, food cost targets, cleanliness standards, labor budgets, performance evaluations, payroll audits. Managers became the frontline enforcers of Pillsbury's back-office vision. The flame broiler was still there. The Whopper was still the crown jewel. But behind the counter, the job was changing. What had once been a practical role, keep the kitchen moving, keep the customers happy, was now layered with paperwork, policies, and numbers. And the next 2 decades would only double down on that shift. By 1970, Burger King was no longer a promising regional brand. It was a national competitor. The sale to Pillsbury had triggered a multi-year strategy to position the company as the only serious rival to McDonald's. The goal was not just to grow. The goal was to outscale and outperform the industry leader at the time. McDonald's was already a juggernaut, with thousands of stores, international presence, and a massive advertising budget. It dominated the American fast food market. Burger King, in contrast, still had fewer than 300 locations in the early part of the decade. Its growth would have to be faster, more aggressive, and tightly controlled to catch up. Pillsbury's plan was to corporatize everything. That meant no more seat-of-the-pants franchising. New store openings were chosen based on national market data and demographic models. The company identified target regions, conducted surveys, and allocated capital based on projected ROI. Regional offices were established in major metro areas. Each one was tasked with managing dozens or even hundreds of stores. District managers were assigned. Area supervisors were hired. The new structure looked more like a military operation than a restaurant chain. Reporting moved upward in layers. A store manager now had to report to a district manager, who reported to a regional VP, who reported to corporate in Minneapolis. Feedback from the stores, the practical lessons learned on the line, took longer to reach the top. If it did at all. Burger King adopted a cookie-cutter store design. Buildings were constructed from a standard set of blueprints, rooflines, interior tile patterns, signage placement, fryer location all predefined. This allowed for lower construction costs, faster build times, and simplified training. It also made the stores easier to maintain. If a freezer broke in Topeka, the replacement part could be pulled from the same shelf as one in Des Moines. Uniformity saved time and money. The restaurants became familiar across the country. Bright colors, vinyl booths, bright lighting, branded trays, uniform tile floors. The iconic Burger King crown sign, mounted high above each property, became a symbol of consistency. Customers knew what to expect. But that consistency came at a cost, especially for managers. The managerial role in the 1970s became more complex. It was no longer enough to know how to run a kitchen. Managers were expected to know labor ratios, hourly wage laws, food safety regulations, OSHA guidelines, marketing rollout timelines, and multi-week prep charts. They were also expected to maintain morale, manage turnover, and stay under budget. Managers received manuals that grew thicker every year. Updates came by mail. Sometimes entire sections were replaced mid-quarter and had to be implemented immediately. Pillsbury also introduced centralized marketing campaigns, meaning that national promotions had to be honored at every location, regardless of whether the store had the ingredients or staff to support them. When Burger King launched a limited-time menu item like the Jumbo ham and cheese sandwich, or later the fish sandwich promotions, managers were expected to execute perfectly, even if the rollout left them underprepared. This meant special ingredients had to be ordered and stored, new prep instructions followed, and temporary packaging used correctly. Errors cost money, and corporate watched closely. Meanwhile, the competition was heating up. McDonald's was introducing innovations like the Egg McMuffin, the Philo Fish, and the Quarter Pounder. Burger King had to respond. It introduced its own product lineup expansions, chicken sandwiches, new fry types, kids' meals. Each change came with new training, new signage, and often new complaints from customers unfamiliar with the menu. Training systems became institutionalized. Burger King created the Management Training Center in Miami, where new managers were sent for intensive instruction. They were taught not just how to cook food, but how to manage people, read profit and loss statements, schedule labor efficiently, and handle customer disputes in line with brand expectations. The training focused on one core principle: run the store like a machine. Each store had its own hierarchy. General manager at the top, usually with years of experience. Assistant managers beneath, often newer, working their way up. Shift supervisors next, often part-timers trying to transition into management. Then the crew, fry cooks, grill operators, cashiers, janitorial workers, and prep staff. Turnover was high at the bottom levels, which meant the manager was always hiring, always training someone new. The pay structure for managers was not generous, but it came with bonuses tied to performance. Labor cost under budget. Bonus, waste levels reduced. Bonus, profit margin increased. Bonus, miss those numbers, and not only would the bonus disappear, but a negative performance review might follow. Managers learned to cut corners carefully, keep the fryer running longer than recommended. Let one fewer person clock in for the shift. Make do with one prep cook instead of two. The Whopper remained the cornerstone of the brand. It was featured in nearly every commercial, every print, ad, every drive-through poster. It represented Burger King's biggest difference from McDonald's. Flame grilled, bigger patty, more toppings, customizable. Have it your way was introduced in the mid-1970s, and the slogan stuck. That campaign changed the way fast food was presented. No longer did you have to accept a product exactly as it came. You could ask for no pickles, extra onions, hold the mayo, more lettuce. Customers appreciated it. Managers, less so. It slowed down prep lines, confused newer employees, increased ticket error rates, and generated more waste. But it was central to the brand, and every employee had to adapt. Throughout the decade, Burger King grew exponentially. By the end of the 1970s, it had over 2,000 locations in the United States. International expansion had begun. Canada, Europe, Latin America. The brand was now truly global. But inside the stores, the systems felt tighter than ever. Technological systems also evolved. In the early part of the decade, orders were written by hand or entered into push-button registers. By the late 1970s, point-of-sale systems with digital screens began appearing. These systems were more efficient but required training. When the PAs froze or broke, managers had to revert to handwritten tickets and mental math, all while corporate demanded average transaction times of 2 minutes or less. The role of the manager became less personal. The days of improvising, running the store based on what felt right, were mostly gone. Managers now followed strict operating guidelines. Each shift had a designated staffing pattern. Each week had a designated cleaning schedule. Each day had 3 or 4 corporate memos sent by fax or courier that dictated store behavior. Deviating from these expectations could cost you your bonus or your job. And all of this led directly into the world of the 1980s Burger King manager. By the time the new decade arrived, the structure was in place. The systems had hardened. The expectations were well established. The machines would get louder. The uniforms would get tighter. The demands would get higher. But the model would stay the same. The 1980s began with both optimism and uncertainty for Burger King. On the surface, things looked strong. The chain had expanded rapidly through the 1970s under Pillsbury's ownership. It had planted its footprint firmly across the United States and was making early moves into overseas markets. Its product identity was clear. The Whopper stood as the central figure of the brand, larger, more customizable, more authentic than its McDonald's counterpart. The company had strong national advertising and a growing customer base, but just below that surface, cracks were beginning to form. Internally, the organization was bloated. Years of expansion had added layers of middle management and bureaucracy. The headquarters in Miami grew increasingly distant from store-level realities. The people writing the training manuals and sales projections were not the ones cleaning fryers or resolving crew conflicts at 9 p.m. on a Saturday night. And managers knew it. They felt the growing divide in every new policy memo, in every revised cleaning checklist, in every quarterly target that made less and less practical sense. Pillsbury, for its part, was starting to worry. While Burger King had grown, it still trailed far behind McDonald's in both store count and revenue. McDonald's had more efficient systems, stronger international distribution, and smoother franchise operations. Pillsbury's corporate executives wanted Burger King to close that gap and fast. To lead that charge, they appointed a new CEO of Burger King in 1979, Donald N. Smith. Smith had previously worked for McDonald's, where he had been instrumental in shaping its internal systems, marketing strategy, and expansion model. Pillsbury brought him in with a clear mission: professionalize Burger King at every level, make it more competitive, and rebuild the brand into something leaner, sharper, and more aggressive. What followed was a massive internal overhaul known as the Burger King operating system. often abbreviated as BKOS. The BKOS was not just a collection of best practices. It was a complete restructuring of how Burger King operated, down to the smallest detail. Every element of the store was placed under a new layer of control. For managers, this meant more reports, more audits, and more pressure. Before BKOS, many store managers operated with a modest amount of flexibility. They could slightly adjust scheduling to match their store's traffic patterns. They could find their own ways to train new hires, often relying on older crew members to guide the younger ones. They could improvise during slow periods or rush hours and run things based on practical experience. BKOS changed that. Under the new system, everything had to be done by the book. There were detailed performance metrics now for nearly every aspect of store operations. Ticket times were timed with stopwatches. Managers were required to document how long it took from the moment an order was placed to the moment it was served, both in store and at the drive-through window. If those times exceeded targets, explanations were expected. If the explanations were not good enough, retraining or probation could follow. There were labor percentage targets, calculated daily. If a store was earning a certain amount of revenue per hour, the manager had to ensure that only a proportional number of employees were clocked in. Too many people working during a slow period, and the manager would be marked down for labor inefficiency. Not enough people working during a rush, and the manager would be marked down for customer service failure. Inventory management became even stricter. Every patty, every bun, every sauce packet had a cost attached to it in the system. Managers had to track waste daily, log it with exact reasons, and file reports that showed not just what had been thrown out, but why, and not vague reason-specific codes. Buns expired, patties dropped, fry batch overcooked, milkshake mix spoiled due to improper rotation. If too much waste was recorded, it would be flagged at the regional level. The store would get a call. The manager would be asked to explain. BKOs also introduced a tiered training system, requiring managers to follow exact lesson plans when onboarding employees. Before this, managers often trained new hires informally shadowing verbal instructions, demonstrations on the line, that was replaced with structured modules, quizzes, checklists, and standardized sign-offs. Only after a crew member completed a specific module could they be scheduled on that station. It slowed down training, but it was mandatory. And perhaps most notably, the company began emphasizing customer perception tracking like never before. Mystery shoppers were deployed nationwide. These were third-party evaluators who would visit stores unannounced, order food, use the restrooms, and fill out a standardized form rating their experience. Managers had no way of knowing when they would be evaluated. The results of the mystery shopper report would be shared directly with district management. If the scores were low, disciplinary action could follow. The message was clear. Managers were not just workers. They were systems enforcers. But that message was often in conflict with daily reality, because despite all the charts and binders and top-down instructions, stores still ran on people. Teenagers who forgot to clock in, part-timers who called out at the last minute, fryers that overheated, delivery trucks that were late, ice machines that jammed, customers who were impatient, air conditioners that failed in summer heat. None of those things responded to policy. They just happened, and the manager had to deal with them anyway. BKOS tried to account for every variable, but in practice, it often created more work. Store managers now had to manage not just the restaurant, but the paperwork that justified it. They spent long hours after the shift ended, logging metrics, preparing next-day labor projections, calculating usage ratios, and submitting forms. Sometimes the work followed them home. District managers were under pressure too, and they passed that pressure downward. A manager might be reprimanded, not for a dirty lobby, but for a missed filing deadline, not for customer complaints, but for having 2 employees on the grill instead of 1 during a mid-afternoon lull. Burger King also changed its advertising strategy during this period, launching some of its most famous, but also most aggressive, campaigns. The Battle of the Burgers campaign in 1982 directly attacked McDonald's and Wendy's. Commercials claimed the Whopper was larger, fresher, more customizable. One campaign featured blind taste tests, showing customers choosing the Whopper over the Big Mac. Another emphasized flame broiling, not frying. These campaigns increased customer interest, but also increased operational strain. More foot traffic meant more sales, but also more customer expectations, longer lines, and more mistakes. Stores needed more staff during high traffic, but corporate expected labor ratios to stay tight. It created a loop of contradiction: push for sales, but keep labor costs low. Push for speed, but follow every training protocol exactly. Push for perfect food, but accept equipment that had not been updated in years. For managers, the 1980s began to feel less like restaurant work and more like data management under stress. They were still responsible for all the same things: quality, cleanliness, crew training, customer service, but now those responsibilities came with time limits, spreadsheet oversight, and very little margin for error. It was still fast food, but the speed was no longer just about the food. It was about how fast you could meet expectations before someone above you noticed. By 1984, Burger King was a different kind of machine. The systems put in place during the early years of the Burger King operating system had become deeply embedded in the daily life of store managers. They were no longer seen as new or innovative. They were simply expected. The rules, the charts, the procedures, all standard. But the longer the system stayed in place, the more it began to show its flaws, and the deeper those flaws became, the harder it was for anyone at the store level to speak up. Burger King's corporate office in Miami was focused almost entirely on growth and image. The executive teams were obsessed with closing the gap between Burger King and McDonald's. Every strategy, every promotion, every new item rollout was designed to position Burger King as the #1 alternative. But from the perspective of managers running the stores, it felt less like strategy and more like chaos. Corporate campaigns arrived faster and in greater numbers than before. Every quarter seemed to bring a new product. Each new item required new training, new storage requirements, and new signage. Most required temporary packaging. Some required new tools or changes to existing equipment. In 1985, Burger King launched a nationwide rollout of the Burger Bundles miniature burgers, designed to compete with White Castle and appeal to children and late-night customers. The product looked fine on a commercial, but in stores, it was a logistical headache. The buns arrived in bulk, but were often fragile and stuck together. They required a different warming tray. The patties were smaller than standard and needed to be broiled separately, increasing the load on the flame broiler. The packaging trays were designed to hold multiples, but they did not fit easily into standard prep areas. Crew members had to be trained quickly, often with little more than a 2-page memo. Managers had to squeeze these changes into already full schedules. Prep areas were tight. Refrigerators were crowded. Fry stations had no room for one more item. but they had to make space. If an order was wrong, the customer did not care that it was a temporary menu item. They just wanted it fixed. Then came the return of the Jumbo in some test markets. Then came new breakfast items. Then came the Where's Herb campaign. The Where's Herb promotion in 1985 and 1986 was intended as a clever marketing game. The premise was that there was a man named Herb who had never eaten a Whopper, and customers who spotted him in a Burger King could win prizes. The promotion came with TV spots, print ads, signage for every store, and a complex set of rules for crew and managers to follow. But in execution, it was a nightmare. There were specific phrases that employees had to say when someone asked about Herb. There were forms to fill out when a customer claimed to have seen him. There were questions about eligibility. There were complaints about confusion. Most customers did not understand the rules. Many employees did not either. Managers were left to clarify, explain, calm angry customers, and coordinate paperwork all for a promotion that did not increase sales meaningfully. On the operational side, the stress was cumulative. By the mid-1980s, the equipment inside a typical Burger King store was aging, and maintenance budgets were tight. Fryers that had been installed in the 1970s were starting to fail more often. Walk-in freezers lost efficiency. Broiler belts jammed more frequently. Ice machines clogged. Managers had to call for service, but vendor response times were slow. In the meantime, the staff had to work around the failure. If the toaster was broken, buns had to be steamed. If the ice machine was down, ice had to be bought in bags from a gas station. These workarounds were not in the manual, but they were. Real managers became experts in solving problems without support. When the shake machine leaked, you placed a pan beneath it and wiped the floor every 30 minutes. When the fry filter clogged, you scooped out oil manually with a ladle and tried not to spill it on your shoes. When the air conditioning failed, you handed out extra napkins and tried to act like the heat was normal. Meanwhile, corporate inspections became more intense. District managers made surprise visits. They walked the line with clipboards, checked prep logs, inspected the restrooms, tested the internal temperature of the fish sandwich using a probe thermometer. If the reading was low, it was marked as a food safety violation. One of many, each visit resulted in a score, and each score was entered into a ranking system that compared stores regionally. High scores meant bonuses. Low scores meant calls to the general manager's home. Sometimes a store was placed on a performance improvement plan. That meant weekly check-ins, retraining, extra paperwork. It was possible to run a clean store with a high score, but it took everything. Every hour, every shift, every decision, and sometimes even that was not enough. Because no matter how perfect the execution, external factors could knock things down. A vendor shipment could arrive spoiled. A crew member could have a personal emergency and walk out mid-shift. A customer could leave a mess in the restroom 5 minutes before inspection, and if that happened, the score dropped, and someone had to answer for it. By this point, managers were also dealing with rising staff turnover. The labor market in the mid-1980s was competitive, especially for young workers. Fast food was seen as entry-level and temporary. Pay was low. Scheduling was inconsistent. The job was difficult. New hires often quit within a week. Some did not show up after orientation. The ones who stayed needed constant supervision. They were not lazy, just undertrained and undersupported. But the system demanded speed, so the manager became a constant middleman between crew and corporate. between picked expectation and reality, between what the customer wanted and what the store could actually do, between the mistakes and the explanation, between the broken and the workaround. Some managers thrived in this pressure, others burned out, most simply endured. They learned to predict when a piece of equipment would fail. They knew which crew members could be trusted to close properly. They memorized the truck delivery schedule, even when it changed. They figured out how to clean a fryer faster than the instructions allowed. They kept spare visors in the back office, spare keys in the drawer, spare gloves in their personal locker. They worked through flu seasons, storms, power outages, and corporate mistakes, and they were still expected to smile. By 1986, the job of managing a Burger King was no longer about food at all. It was about holding the store together while the company tried to reinvent itself from the top down, one memo at a time. By 1987, Burger King was struggling to figure out what it wanted to be. From the outside, the restaurants still looked clean and functional. The drive-thrus were busy. The Whopper was still on the menu. But internally, the company was going through a quiet crisis. Its rapid expansion through the 1970s and early 1980s had outpaced its infrastructure. The systems put in place by Pillsbury and the executives in Miami were aging, both in design and in philosophy. The fast food market was evolving, but Burger King was not keeping up. At the store level, this translated to instability. There were more menu changes, more promotions, more training manuals, but fewer resources to handle them. Budgets were tightened, crew hours were slashed, repairs were delayed. Corporate messaging became more abstract and more disconnected. Managers still had the same responsibilities, but now they were being asked to do even more with even less. The most immediate sign of strain was employee turnover. The labor force was changing. Teenagers were harder to hire and even harder to retain. Fast food was no longer the only job in town. Retail was growing. Malls were booming. There were more part-time options, many of which paid similarly but felt less demanding. A young person could work in a shoe store or at a movie theater and avoid the noise, grease, and pressure of a hot kitchen. This left Burger King managers in a constant cycle of hiring, training, and losing staff. The process was always the same: a stack of applications, short interviews, orientation videos played on a small television in the break room, uniforms distributed from a plastic storage bin in the manager's office, names added to the schedule. Then the new hire would show up late or not at all. Maybe they would make it through a week or two, maybe less. The crew was always short. The manager always filled in. If a cashier called out, the manager ran the front. If the fry station was down one person, the manager dropped baskets between checking inventory logs. If someone left mid-shift, the manager covered the prep table, then rushed back to answer the phone or take a deposit to the safe. The job became a form of multitasking that never ended. And through all this, Burger King corporate continued launching initiatives that ignored these on-the-ground realities. The company doubled down on product complexity. New limited-time offers were introduced without regard for operational capacity. Some stores were already cramped. Adding one more specialty, sandwich, meant reorganizing entire workstations. Items like the Chicken Club sandwich or specialty cheeseburgers required additional ingredients: bacon, different sauces, lettuce blends that had to be stocked, rotated, and accounted for. Training for these items was often last minute. Crew members learned by trial and error. Customers complained when their sandwich looked nothing like the picture. Corporate also introduced the Burger King Kids Club in 1989. This marketing initiative was meant to compete with McDonald's Happy Meals by offering a more diverse and identifiable set of characters. There were cartoons, comic books, branded meal boxes, and new toy lines. Managers were told to set up new point-of-sale displays, maintain inventory on the toys, and ensure proper distribution. If the wrong toy went in the wrong meal, it was a customer service issue. If toys ran out early, the manager had to deal with the parents and their disappointed kids. There was also pressure to upsell. Drive-through scripts were updated. Crew were instructed to ask every customer if they wanted to try the new item. New signs were installed. Sometimes the corporate office would fax out reminders midweek to all stores. Push the chicken tenders. Feature the deluxe Whopper. Highlight the new pie flavor. These messages came without regard for what was happening in the store. If a manager had a fryer down and was short to employees, that script became irrelevant, but skipping it meant a markdown in mystery. Shopper reports. Behind all of this was an even bigger change. Pillsbury had started to lose interest in Burger King. The division was not growing fast enough. It was not competing effectively with McDonald's, nor with newer players like Wendy's and the rapidly expanding Taco Bell. Pillsbury executives were rethinking their portfolio in the boardrooms. Burger King was no longer seen as a growth asset. It was becoming a problem to solve. In 1989, Pillsbury was purchased by the British conglomerate Grand Metropolitan, also known as Grand Met. Grand Met was a multinational company that specialized in alcohol, hospitality, and retail. It had no serious background in fast food, but it acquired Pillsbury for its food products, not for Burger King. The burger chain was part of the package one that Grand Met would now have to deal with for store managers. This change in ownership brought uncertainty and confusion. The memos changed. The logos changed. New regional directors were appointed. Some training materials were replaced. Others were phased out slowly. Standards shifted. And while all this was happening at the top, managers were still just trying to keep the fryer working and the shift covered. There were cost-cutting initiatives that hit quickly. Maintenance calls required more approval. Inventory deliveries were adjusted. Some items were ordered in smaller quantities. Others were discontinued entirely. Stores were encouraged to cut labor hours where possible. This meant shorter shifts for crew, more responsibility for managers, and an even tighter margin for error during busy periods. The culture inside stores began to change. Veteran crew members who had been with Burger King for years started to leave. General managers who had stuck through the system's growth years began to burn out. The loyalty that had once existed was fading. The job no longer felt like a career for many. It was becoming a grind, an endless loop of staffing issues, equipment problems, customer complaints, and unachievable targets. Training quality declined. Stores that used to have organized onboarding now pushed new hires onto the floor after just a few hours of paperwork. Instruction was done verbally, sometimes not at all. Errors increased. So did frustration. Managers found themselves stuck between undertrained staff and angry customers. And still, corporate demanded metrics. Food cost, labor percentage, customer satisfaction, speed of service, cleanliness, audits, training compliance, upsell ratios, drive-through ticket times. All of it tracked, all of it reviewed, and very little of it supported by actual resources. By the end of the 1980s, The experience of managing a Burger King had evolved into something exhausting and paradoxical. The systems were tighter than ever, but the support was weaker. The expectations were higher, but the margins were thinner. The brand was larger, but the job felt smaller, more isolated. The store manager was no longer just a leader on the floor. They were now a buffer between a disconnected corporate structure and the crew who had to make the food, between a customer who wanted perfect service and a system that was barely functioning, between pride in a brand and the quiet reality of trying to survive inside it. By the early 1990s, Burger King found itself once again in transition. The brand had passed through ownership changes, failed promotions, costly expansions, and corporate shakeups. Now, under the control of Grand Metropolitan, it faced the challenge of maintaining relevance in an increasingly crowded and evolving fast food market. McDonald's was still the dominant player by far. Wendy's had found a stable niche as a mid-price competitor with a loyal customer base. Taco Bell was growing quickly by offering cheap food at faster speed. Even upstart brands like Subway were beginning to eat into Burger King's potential. Lunch traffic, Grand Met executives knew the chain needed revitalization, but what the stores needed and what corporate delivered were rarely aligned. That at the corporate level, Burger King's leadership focused on rebranding. They saw their image as outdated. Too many stores still had wood paneling, brown and orange, color palettes, and boxy architecture that felt stuck in the 1970s. The uniforms were faded and scratchy. The furniture looked cheap. The logo had not changed in over a decade. Everything, from the dining room chairs to the napkin font, seemed to signal that Burger King had missed the cultural shift into the new decade. So, in 1991 and 1992, Burger King began a brand refresh. The logo was redrawn, slightly modernized, with a bolder font and sleeker colors. New restaurant designs were rolled out under the banner of BK of the Future. These stores featured angled roofs, large glass windows, brighter interiors, and a new color scheme with deeper reds, purples, and grays. Uniforms were redesigned to appear more modern. Promotional materials emphasized freshness and quality. Training manuals were revised, and new videos were shipped to stores on VHS tapes for use in orientation. At first glance, it all seemed positive, but at the store level, none of these changes addressed the core operational issues. Managers still worked with old equipment. The BK of the Future design was only applied to select stores, mostly high-traffic urban locations or newly built franchises. The majority of locations remained exactly as they were, with the same aging fryers, cracked prep counters, rusting metal shelves, and outdated point-of-sale terminals. The paint on the walls might have been updated, but the machines behind those walls were the same ones that had been pushed to their limits for over a decade. In many stores, the cash registers were still partially analog. They required double entry for discounts. Managers had to manually reconcile daily totals using printed receipts, calculator tapes, and carbon copy shift logs. If the register jammed, the manager had to remove the paper, reload it, and sometimes rekey an entire shift's transactions into the books. Corporate promised upgrades, but they came slowly and unevenly. A small number of stores began testing early touchscreen point-of-sale systems, and while the new systems were smoother once learned, they came with new headaches, bugs, system crashes, power issues, and they required training that many crew members simply never received. Managers had to learn the software themselves, often by trial and error. When things broke, They had to call tech support numbers printed on laminated cards, taped behind the office door. Wait times could stretch to hours. In the meantime, orders piled up. The pressure on store managers intensified. Corporate had begun implementing scorecard performance systems that assigned numeric values to nearly every aspect of the store. These were visible to both district managers and regional directors. Metrics included labor efficiency, food waste, cleanliness, audit scores, mystery shopper evaluations, average transaction time, and customer complaints. These numbers were updated weekly. Some were posted on internal dashboards. If your store ranked low in the district, your name appeared on a list. Everyone above you knew exactly how you were performing. The scorecard system was meant to encourage accountability and improvement. In practice, it often fostered anxiety and micromanagement. Managers no longer had to simply run a clean, functional store. They had to play a numbers game, constantly adjusting scheduling, cleaning, stocking, and customer interaction to optimize metrics. One missed shift or one negative review could knock a store's standing down for weeks. Managers lost bonuses. Some were demoted. A few were fired. Meanwhile, new product launches continued to arrive with relentless frequency. Items like the BK broiler and the new crispy chicken sandwich required new handling procedures, new sauces, and revised packaging flows. Each new item came with 3 or 4 laminated cards explaining ingredients, assembly instructions, holding times, and allergen disclosures. Crew had to memorize new layouts. Managers had to reorganize prep stations, adjust cook times, and write training schedules for items that might only last 6 weeks on the menu. Managers were also caught in the middle of the corporate cleanliness push. In response to growing public focus on food safety and store hygiene, Burger King increased its audit frequency. Corporate inspectors performed surprise visits, checking hand-washing logs, meat temperatures, freezer organization, chemical, storage, and restroom conditions. A single failing grade could prompt mandatory retraining or even temporary closure. Managers were told to treat every day as if it were inspection day. That meant printing new checklists, running mock audits, and tracking who was wiping down what surface and how often. But staffing levels did not increase. Managers were still running stores with minimal coverage, juggling floor supervision with back-office reporting and maintenance coordination. A single crew member calling out could throw off the entire shift. Hiring remained a challenge. The economy in the early 1990s was unstable. Minimum wage remained low. Most job seekers viewed fast food as temporary. Managers spent hours reviewing applications, scheduling interviews, conducting orientations, and completing hiring paperwork only for new hires to leave after a few days. The churn never stopped, and each departure meant more hours spent on interviews and paperwork, hours that no one else was covering. Behind the scenes, Grand Met was still trying to figure out Burger King's long-term value. The company had little patience for underperformance. It expected returns, but the tools it gave store operators were limited. Managers were treated as responsible for outcomes, but not consulted on strategy. Very few suggestions from the field made their way back up the ladder. When a district manager asked for feedback, it was usually because a score was down, not because the company wanted to understand what was actually happening inside the store. The physical toll on managers grew more obvious. 12-hour shifts became common, standing for hours on tile floors in heat that often exceeded 85 degrees. Constant noise, the repetitive strain of restocking, lifting heavy oil jugs, scrubbing under fryers. Fast food management was not sedentary. It was physically demanding, mentally draining, logistically complex, and it offered little room for error. By 1993, Burger King had lost nearly a full percentage point of market share to its competitors. Some stores were profitable, many were not. Franchise owners grumbled, corporate strategists reshuffled, rebranding efforts continued, but inside the stores, managers kept working. They walked the line during lunch rushes. They handled customer complaints. They trained 2 new hires on the same day while covering a sick employee's shift. They ran out of straws and had to drive to another store to borrow a case. They took calls from vendors. They reset frozen registers. They scrubbed tile at closing. They printed prep lists. They recalculated schedules. They stayed late. They kept the doors open, even when the system felt like it was collapsing behind them. By 1994, Burger King was in the middle of a quiet identity crisis. The golden years of growth had passed. The days of being a fresh challenger to McDonald's were gone. What remained was a company that had stretched itself thin. With over 7,000 stores globally, a long history of inconsistent leadership, and an aging operational structure, Burger King entered the mid-1990s trying to stay relevant in a market that had changed faster than it had. For the corporate leadership, the new solution was value pricing. McDonald's had successfully introduced its value menu years earlier, featuring low-cost items priced between 79 and 99 cents. This strategy had resonated with customers. It promised predictable spending, even for families on a tight budget. It boosted traffic and simplified ordering, and it made fast food feel even faster. Wendy's followed suit with its own super value menu. Taco Bell embraced a similar strategy. Soon, the 99-cent item was no longer a promotion, it was a baseline expectation. Burger King, under pressure to respond, rolled out its own version, Burger King Everyday Value. This program offered reduced pricing on select items: cheeseburgers, fries, drinks, and later items like the rodeo burger, a small sandwich topped with onion rings and barbecue sauce. The pricing structure varied by region, but in many stores, the menu had to be overhauled to reflect the new tiered pricing. Signs were replaced. Register menus were updated. Staff had to be retrained on the new pricing structure and how to upsell from it. But where this strategy succeeded for McDonald's, it created problems inside Burger King. The pricing pressure eroded margins. Many of the discounted items were already low profit. Selling them for less meant that every transaction had to be faster, more accurate, and more efficient to maintain profitability. But Burger King's kitchens were not built for this kind of speed. Unlike McDonald's, which relied heavily on a make-line system that used pre-portioned patties and tightly controlled cook cycles, Burger King still relied on flame broilers. These machines required time to warm up, time to cook, and time to clean. They created variability in production. Flame broiling gave the Whopper its signature taste, but it came at the cost of flexibility. Managers quickly found themselves caught in a dangerous balance. They were expected to move more units at lower margins without additional staff. Labor budgets were not increased to accommodate the uptick in volume. Waste tracking became even more critical. Mistakes on a 99-cent burger added up quickly when hundreds were sold per day. And for managers already stretched thin, the value menu became one more layer of complexity in a system already sagging underweight. At the same time, franchisee dissatisfaction was reaching a boiling point. Most Burger King stores were franchised. That meant they were technically owned and operated by individuals or franchise groups who had signed contracts with Burger King Corporation. These franchisees paid royalties, followed brand standards, and accepted national pricing decisions, but they also bore the full cost of implementation. When the value menu was introduced, it was mandatory, but franchisees were expected to eat the cost. Many saw their profits shrink. Some stores already operating on thin margins dipped into the red. And worse, corporate rolled out these changes without consistent operational support. There were no grants for store upgrades, no subsidies for new signage, no new tools for managers, just new expectations. Tensions flared. Franchise owners formed advisory councils. Some began withholding investment in their stores. Others reduced hours or cut local marketing budgets. The burden of these decisions fell directly on managers. Crew hours were reduced. Maintenance was deferred. Cleanliness slipped. When a fryer broke, it took longer to fix. When a toilet clogged, it stayed that way longer. When an employee called out sick, their shift was not covered. The manager was simply expected to adapt. Corporate continued to act as if everything was under control. They pushed more branding changes, more limited time offers, more packaging updates. In 1995, Burger King launched a campaign to modernize its image again. The advertising slogan was changed to "Get your burger's worth." It was an attempt to blend the value focus with a promise of quality. But in the stores, that meant more promotional materials, more combo offerings, more confusion at the register. Many managers had stopped believing in corporate strategy altogether, not out of disloyalty, but exhaustion. They had learned to operate in a world where top-down decisions often made their jobs harder. They did not resist changes, but they no longer expected help either. They adapted quietly. They trained staff the way they knew worked. They adjusted schedules to balance burnout with budget. They filled in gaps when policies failed. They stopped asking for more and focused on getting through the day. The stores themselves were showing their age. Paint chipped in dining rooms, booths cracked and sagged, ceiling tiles stained, kitchen tiles wore thin, equipment broke more frequently, parts became harder to source, broilers smoked more, ice machines froze less, freezer hinges rusted. The stores that had not received the BK of the Future upgrade were essentially frozen in the early 1980s. But customers still came. Maybe not in the numbers they once had, but enough to keep the line moving. They came for Whoppers. They came for fries. They came for a 99-cent cheeseburger. They came because it was familiar. And the manager, usually exhausted, often working open to close, always watching the fryer while glancing at the back office reports, kept it going because the system, as flawed as it was, still needed someone to keep the pieces together. By 1996, Burger King was no longer leading anything. It still had thousands of locations. It still served millions of customers each week, but it no longer defined the conversation around fast food. It no longer set trends. It was no longer considered dangerous by McDonald's or exciting by customers. It was still there, still visible on highways and street corners, but it had become something quieter, familiar, background, sometimes overlooked. For the managers working inside those stores, this shift was not abstract. It was daily and personal. Burger King's leadership had entered a phase of constant repositioning. Each year brought a new executive plan to revitalize the brand, a new campaign, a new item, a new slogan. but none of it addressed the core issue that the stores themselves were exhausted. The equipment was aging. The staff was underpaid. The systems were overcomplicated, and the managers were burning out. The company had tried to reassert itself with advertising, most notably with the Your Way Right Away campaign, which played off the idea of flexibility and fast service, but it was not tied to operational improvements. Stores were still under the same pressure, still working with tight labor budgets, and still dealing with equipment that had not changed since the early 1980s. In 1997, Burger King introduced the Big King-a-ta Patty sandwich aimed directly at the Big Mac. It had a similar sauce, similar architecture, and was marketed heavily as a better version of McDonald's most iconic item at the store level. This meant new packaging, new build charts, new order combinations, and new customer confusion. People ordered it expecting a Big Mac. Crew had to be trained to explain the difference. Sometimes customers asked for the Big Mac by name, forgetting where they were. Managers handled it like they handled everything else that same year. New combo meal structures were introduced, reshuffling prices and options. Value meals became more complex. The drive-through menu had to be updated with removable panels. Some stores received updated signage, others did not. This created inconsistency between locations. Customers noticed. Managers dealt with the fallout behind the scenes. The franchise relationship was growing worse. Franchisees had been unhappy with Grand Met's management for years. The rollout of national promotions that undercut local profitability, the failure to modernize equipment, the inconsistency in technology rollouts, the weak national advertising, all of it had eroded trust. Managers, again, were caught in the middle. They had no control over franchise policy, but when budgets were cut or hours slashed, it was the manager who had to explain it. When the store needed new equipment and the owner refused to invest, it was the manager who had to keep things working. When a new regional directive arrived that made no operational sense, it was the manager who had to explain it to the crew, implement it anyway, and absorb the complaints. The industry outside Burger King was changing fast. By 1998, fast casual restaurants were beginning to gain traction. Brands like Panera Bread, Chipotle, and Boston Market offered freshly made food in more upscale settings. These places had better lighting, cleaner seating, and the illusion of healthier options. They were seen as the next evolution of quick service dining. Customers noticed. Younger workers noticed. Some of the employees that Burger King once easily recruited were now applying elsewhere. The staff became harder to hold. Managers saw more churn. Fewer people wanted to work night shifts, or clean fryers, or get burned by a broiler belt. Training became constant. Some managers stopped printing training checklists because they never lasted long enough to use the second page. Hiring became a weekly ritual. Interview for hire to retain one. In the kitchen. Things broke more often. There was a particular kind of broiler that had been in use since the early 1980s. Most stores still had it. It ran hot. The motor belt slipped. The chain needed lubrication every few days. When it jammed, patties would back up and fall off the tray. The grease tray had to be emptied every few hours or it would spill onto the floor. Some managers did this themselves rather than assigning it. It was faster and avoided arguments, but it meant more physical strain. Kneeling on tile, lifting heavy trays, dodging the heat. The freezer doors no longer sealed properly. The fryer filters clogged more often. The shake machines were still unreliable. Sometimes they worked. Sometimes they made a terrible grinding sound and stopped altogether. Repairs could take days. Customers would ask why they were always broken. The manager would smile, apologize, and offer an extra Sunday topping for the inconvenience. Some stores received digital upgrades, but they were uneven. A few locations got updated drive-through timers. These systems tracked how long each car waited. The data was sent to district management. If the numbers were bad, someone would call, but the speaker system was still the same crackling hardware from 15 years earlier. Crew had to lean in to hear. Orders were misheard. Repeats slowed the line. The numbers dropped. The manager got the call. By this time, store-level communication with corporate was nearly non-existent. Everything came through the franchise operator or the district manager. There was no hotline to headquarters. There was no suggestion box. There was only the performance board. A store was either red, yellow, or green. Green meant compliance. Red meant trouble. Yellow meant you were close to slipping. No one asked how the team was doing. No one asked if the equipment worked. Managers learned to live with the disconnect. They stopped expecting improvements. They became resourceful instead. They kept spare parts in the office. They called other stores when they ran out of bags or napkins. They posted their own training guides on the prep table. They cut schedules to the bone during slow periods, then worked unpaid hours to prep for inspection. They mopped the lobby themselves if the closer was inexperienced. They paid for paper towels out of pocket. They skipped breaks. Sometimes they would park out back after close and just sit there, 10-15 minutes, in silence, in the same car they had driven to work in 12 hours earlier. The job was never about glory, but in the late 1990s, it became a study in quiet endurance. Every shift was a test. Every shift was a puzzle. Every shift was survival, and still the whopper sizzled. The drive-through light stayed on. The timers beeped. The doors opened on time because that was the job, and someone had to do it at the stroke of the year 2000. Burger King was once again in flux in 2002. Grand Metropolitan, by then known as Diageo, after a corporate merger officially sold Burger King to a group of investment firms. Among them was Texas Pacific Group, Bain Capital, and Goldman Sachs Capital Partners. Together, they formed a holding company and promised to breathe new life into the aging chain. Internally, the messaging was optimistic. Leadership spoke of modernization, streamlining, revitalizing the brand. But inside the stores, for the managers, who had already lived through 2 decades of leadership changes and half-implemented reinventions, the mood was different. They had heard it all before, and they knew what would happen next. What came first was technology. Corporate began rolling out new point-of-sale systems, replacing the older terminals with touchscreen stations that allowed for faster ordering and better integration with promotional items. On paper, this was a major upgrade, but as usual, the implementation was rushed and uneven. Some stores received new terminals quickly, others waited months. The rollout instructions arrived in the form of bulky manuals and training CDs. Managers were expected to set the systems up, train the crew, troubleshoot problems, and explain to customers why their order had been miskeyed when a new button layout caused confusion. At the same time, drive-through timing systems became more sophisticated. The new timers tracked every car from speaker to pickup window, measured average service time down to the second, and stored data for weekly reviews. These timers were mounted above the manager station, always visible. Red numbers meant slow service. Green numbers meant success, but they did not measure context. If one car had a large order, the numbers dropped. If the headset cut out during rain, the numbers dropped. If the broiler jammed, if someone had to go refill condiments, if the payment terminal glitched, it all added seconds. And those seconds were visible to every employee and every supervisor. Managers were asked why the time was creeping up, even when they knew the answer and could do nothing to change it. Alongside the tech push, Burger King launched another wave of branding changes. A new logo was introduced in 1999, with smoother lines and a more modern appearance. The slogan "The fire's ready" was added in some campaigns, pushing the idea of flame grilling as a differentiator. Stores received updated signage, some new uniforms, and in some cases, remodeled dining rooms with warmer tones, updated furniture, and different floor tile. These changes were welcome, but also cosmetic. Behind the new counters, the core problems remained untouched. Equipment was still failing regularly. Fryer filters clogged, broilers overheated, ice machines broke, paper towel dispensers stuck, prep sinks backed up, and repairs still took days, sometimes weeks. Managers filled out maintenance requests that had to be faxed to district offices. In the meantime, they made do. They trained their crew to bypass glitches, to rotate stock manually, to scoop ice from storage with a clean pitcher when the machine jammed again. Then came the menu complexity spike. Burger King introduced new chicken products, including the Tender Crisp and the Tender Grill, each with their own holding times, breading, storage needs, and assembly instructions. There was the new BK Veggie. There was the launch of stackers with 2, 3, even 4 patties. Each item required its own SKU, its own promo material, its own storage bin. Drive-through ordering became more complicated. Customers got confused, crew got flustered, orders backed up, food waste climbed. For managers, this meant constant retraining. Crew turnover remained high. New hires came in unprepared and left quickly. High school students worked weekends but quit during exam weeks. Older employees wanted consistent hours but were scheduled around peak traffic. Hiring was always behind. Schedules were always tight. Managers covered closing shifts themselves just to keep the line running. They showed up early to check freezer temperatures before inspections. They stayed late to complete prep for CLOSERS. To the outside world, Burger King still looked the same. The signs still lit up at dusk. The Whopper still sizzled. The lobby was swept. The drive-through bell still rang. But to the people inside, the strain was louder than ever. The investment firms that now owned the company were focused on profitability. Stores that underperformed were marked for sale or closure. Some franchisees were pushed to upgrade or exit. Others squeezed budgets tighter. Managers received less overtime, fewer labor hours, smaller supply orders. The answer to every shortfall was to do more with less. And still, every week, the metrics came in. Ticket times, food cost percentages, waste logs, labor ratios, upsell percentages, cleanliness, audits, temperature logs, training completions, manager evaluations. It was not a job anymore. It was a permanent audit. Meanwhile, customers changed to dot. The early 2000s brought the first wave of public internet reviews. Platforms like Yelp and early versions of Google reviews began influencing public perception. A single bad visit could be memorialized in a 1-star comment. Sometimes it was fair, Often it was not. And always the manager was responsible. If a fry batch was too cold, if the bathroom was untidy, if the line was long, if the cashier forgot to smile, the review was posted. Corporate saw it. District managers saw it. Follow-up emails arrived. The training changed again. Now there were new service scripts, new courtesy protocols, new greeting standards. Crew were taught to greet within 5 seconds, offer 2 sauces, thank the guest by name when possible. Managers were expected to enforce it, even when they barely had enough hands on deck to cover the shift. But they kept going. They arrived at dawn. They brewed coffee for the first few breakfast guests. They inspected the restroom. They counted drawers. They checked the truck delivery schedule. They filled out the daily planner. They worked the lunch rush. They coached a new hire on safe handling temperatures. They took a vendor call. They replaced the soda nozzles. They calmed an angry customer. They apologized for the shake machine. They reprinted time cards. They locked up. They went home. And they came back again. Every day, because in spite of everything, of every memo, every broken broiler, every impossible metric, every vague promise of change, they still believed in doing the job right, even if no one else seemed to notice. In 2005, Burger King made headlines again. Not for new food, or new operations, or a wave of store renovations, but for something else entirely. The king was back. Not the symbolic one, not just the logo, but the plastic-faced mascot, revived from 1970s children's advertising and repurposed into a strange, silent, staring character for modern viral campaigns. This creepy king, as some customers called him, popped up in commercials, standing in bedrooms, at office desks, in unexpected places, handing people sandwiches in total silence. The ads were odd, sometimes unsettling, and completely different from anything McDonald's or Wendy's were doing. The campaign, led by advertising agency Crispin Porter plus Boguski, was bold. It got attention. The commercials were shared online. They made late-night TV. They were talked about. For the first time in years, Burger King seemed to have a distinct brand personality again. But for managers, none of that changed the day-to-day. The king did not help you fix a broken fryer. He did not show up to cover a no-call no-show shift. He did not train the new night cook or take a register when the line backed up. He was just another marketing layer added to a system already buckling under its own complexity. The most immediate effect was merchandising. Stores received new standees, display materials, window clings, and packaging. Uniform patches were updated. Training DVDs featured snippets of the king. Managers had to install cardboard figures in the lobby. Some customers liked it. Others found it unnerving. Children sometimes cried. Teenagers took selfies with the cutout. Some were stolen outright. It was a conversation piece, but it had nothing to do with operations. Then came the media problem. Marketing promised things the stores could not deliver. The 2005 ads launched the enormous omelette sandwicher breakfast item made with sausage, bacon, eggs, cheese, and a long bun the size of a sub. It looked massive on camera. In the store, it was a challenge. The sandwich required a different holding tray, longer prep time, and more precise cook cycles to get everything heated through without drying out. Most kitchens were not designed for this item. Space was limited. Breakfast menus were already tight. Crew fumbled assembly. Orders were returned. Managers fielded complaints. The sandwich sold well for a time, but it pushed prep to the edge, stressed egg inventories, and added pressure to the morning shift. which was usually staffed lighter than lunch or dinner, and like many LTO's limited time offers, it disappeared before the stores ever got fully used to it. Meanwhile, corporate launched a range of new product experiments, including the Angus steak burger, chicken fries, the BK stacker, and new salads that required additional produce, storage, and extra prep handling. Each one came with its own demands, its own training packet, new packaging inserts, updated register buttons, and a learning curve that fell entirely on the shoulders of already overworked managers and crew. At the same time, Burger King began experimenting with stunt marketing, including games, online campaigns, and branded tins with Xbox games like Sneak King, where players played as the mascot delivering sandwiches. These efforts got media coverage, but again did not move the needle inside the stores. Franchisees were skeptical. Many had not seen profit increases despite the marketing hype. They complained that corporate was focused on image, not fundamentals. Managers felt this disconnect daily. Their problems remained grounded in broken freezers, sticky soda nozzles, inconsistent supply shipments, undertrained staff, and labor targets that left no margin for error. Technologically, stores continued migrating to digital systems, but unevenly. Some locations had modernized PA's systems, integrated kitchen displays, and updated drive-through timers. Others were still relying on patched hardware and daily workarounds. Corporate provided training materials, but never enough time or support to implement them properly. Managers found themselves explaining broken headsets, troubleshooting network outages mid-shift, and training new hires on new screens while also managing food temperatures, customer complaints, and the never-ending clock of the drive-through monitor. Internally, the burden of labor optimization got heavier. Payroll systems introduced automated scheduling tools that calculated ideal shift patterns based on projected sales and labor percentages. But these projections often did not match reality. They did not account for local events, unexpected rushes, weather, or the fact that a veteran employee quitting could throw off the entire rhythm of a store. So managers continued doing what they always had, filling the gaps. They wrote schedules by hand, moved people around on the fly, begged for overtime approval, or simply stayed on the floor themselves to keep things running. Crew turnover remained high. There was a national shortage of long-term fast food workers. Training was constant. Retraining was unavoidable. Managers kept blank W for South in the drawer. They had extra visors in the office. They built their teams one interview at a time, one compromise at a time, and always the performance reports continued. Mystery shopper scores, drive-through times, food safety audits, cleanliness checks, inventory variants, upsell percentages, complaint logs. These were not occasional. They were constant. Managers reviewed these numbers at the end of long shifts, sometimes while still in uniform, eating the same food they had just served all day. Corporate insisted that things were improving, but the crew did not feel it. The customers did not see it. And the managers, they lived with the contradiction. They managed the contradiction. They wore the headset, flipped the patties, managed the labor, took the heat, stayed late, opened early, fixed the machine, answered the phone, held the line. They made it work. Not because the system worked, but because they did. By 2008, the world had changed. The global economy was falling apart. The financial crisis, rooted in collapsing mortgages and reckless speculation, spread into every corner of daily life, including fast food. But while other industries saw layoffs, hiring freezes, and full shutdowns, quick service restaurants like Burger King, remained open, but not untouched. Traffic was still steady. People still needed to eat. But what they ordered changed. They spent less. They chose from the value menu. They split meals. They skipped the combo and asked for water cups instead. The average check amount dropped, and that shift, though slight per order, had a cascading effect on every store. Managers saw it on paper and in person. Weekly sales reports trended downward. Inventory orders shrank. Labor budgets were reduced in tiny but measurable amounts, half a shift here, one fewer closer there. Each small cut made things harder. Managers, already operating at the edge of capacity, now had to run lunch with 2 fewer people or clean the lobby themselves instead of assigning the task. It was not dramatic, but it was unrelenting. The recession amplified long-standing problems. Crew turnover got worse. Workers who might have stuck around now jumped ship the moment a retail store offered 50 cents more per hour. Hiring became more desperate. Fewer applicants showed up. Interviews were shorter. Onboarding got sloppier. Managers hired people who were barely ready and hoped they would catch on by shadowing more experienced crew. Sometimes they did. Usually they did not. Training was a luxury. Most training happened on the floor, in real time, in the middle of Russia's dot, in the same period. Burger King underwent yet another ownership change. In 2010, the company was sold again, this time to 3G Capital, a Brazilian investment firm with a reputation for aggressive cost-cutting and operational streamlining. They were not interested in quirky mascots or niche promotions. They wanted to rebuild the company's fundamentals and make it lean. The King, as a mascot, was quietly retired. Marketing focused more on the food, simpler, straighter, fewer stunts. No more Xbox games, no more creepy commercials. Instead, there was a new emphasis on consistency, efficiency, and profitability. But as always, these decisions played out differently. At the store level, 3G Capital brought a hard edge to operations. They slashed corporate overhead. They shut down underperforming locations. They pushed for greater control over franchising. They emphasized the importance of profitability at all costs. In practice, this meant managers were given even less room to maneuver. Labor cost targets were lowered. Food waste thresholds were tightened. Inspections became more rigorous. Every dollar spent on supplies, maintenance, or overtime had to be justified. District managers visited more often. Surprise audits became a weekly concern. Bonus structures were rewritten. Some were eliminated entirely. In some regions, managers had to submit daily logs, not just of sales, but of every crew, movement clock-ins, breaks, shift, swaps into online portals. There was no time for mistakes. And yet mistakes became more common because everyone was exhausted. Stores continued operating on outdated equipment. Some locations received upgraded broilers and fryers, but most did not. The disparity between stores grew. A remodeled location across town had new prep, counters, digital menu boards, and touchscreen drink machines, but just 5 miles away. A store run by the same manager for 10 years still had the same flickering light in the walk-in freezer and the same warped cutting board that rocked on one corner. Nothing highlighted the operational gaps more than the relaunch of the Whopper. Burger King's most iconic sandwich was now being positioned as a premium item, again flame-grilled, fully customizable, fresher ingredients. The ad campaigns emphasized hand-built sandwiches, clean ingredients, and store-level craftsmanship. But the experience of building Whoppers in the back of a 30-year-old store with inconsistent prep tables limited holding bins, and a staff maid, up of 2 overworked teens and a night shift cook, painted a very different picture to fulfill the promise. Managers had to enforce more line discipline. This meant retraining crew on sandwich assembly, ensuring toppings were fresh and layered properly, making sure the buns were toasted, right, not burned, not underdone. It meant more prep work, more waste tracking, more reminders to rotate stock, more time, but the schedules did not get longer. The number of crew per shift did not increase. The expectations grew, but the support did not. Customer behavior had changed too. Social media was now mainstream. Smartphone cameras were always on. A bad meal could be photographed, tagged, posted, and shared widely within minutes. Customers were no longer limited to calling the store or submitting a paper complaint. Now, their reviews were public. Managers were encouraged to monitor Yelp and respond when necessary, but most barely had time to complete their night reports. Meanwhile, morale inside the stores remained low. The few employees who stayed long-term were often the glue holding everything together. One reliable opener, one night shift cook who never called out, a dependable shift lead who could jump on the drive-thru when the line spiked. Managers leaned on these people heavily. Some gave them extra hours, others bought them meals out of pocket. There was little else they could do. Raises were rare. Recognition came in the form of Team Member of the Month certificates printed from a back-office computer that took 5 minutes to boot. Every month brought a new set of materials to post: the food safety posters, the updated allergens list, the anti-harassment policy, the labor law updates, the seasonal LTO signage, the latest manager checklist. Most of it went on the same bulletin board, layered, thumbtacked over last quarter's version. Managers kept it up because they had to. But few believed these things helped run a better store. The financial crisis had made people more cautious. Fewer risks, fewer complaints up the chain. Just survival. By 2010, many of the managers who had started in the 1980s were gone, retired, burned out, moved on. The new crop of managers were younger, sometimes promoted early, sometimes unprepared, but the job was the same. The weight of an entire system on the shoulders of one person who had to make it work. The grease traps still needed cleaning. The shift still needed coverage. The burgers still had to be flame grilled, served hot, served fast, served right, and if a drawer was short, or the freezer stopped working, or the new hire quit mid-shift, or the fryer burned out in the middle of lunch, the manager stayed late. Again, in 2011, Burger King changed owners again. This time, the buyer was 3G Capital, again, but now they had a different plan. Instead of investing in all company-owned restaurants directly, Burger King's new leadership committed to refranchising the vast majority of its stores. In other words, sell them off to franchisees, reduce corporate overhead, and focus on branding, marketing, and high-level oversight rather than the direct management of thousands of locations. It was a business decision: leaner, lower risk, more scalable on paper. But at the store level, the consequences were mixed. Some stores were sold to well-established franchise groups, companies that already owned dozens or hundreds of locations, often with robust regional support. But others were sold to smaller operators who lacked the resources or incentive to invest. This created a split reality: modern, well-managed stores in some regions and neglected, outdated stores in others. For general managers, little changed in terms of core duties. They still opened the store, still ordered the stock, still trained the crew, still watched the cameras, counted the drawers, and managed the food safety checklists. But now their immediate employer might be a different legal entity, a new franchise operator. Sometimes that meant different rules. Sometimes it meant a different payroll system. In the best cases, it meant better support. In the worst cases, it meant more budget cuts and less communication at the same time. Burger King's corporate strategy began leaning into international markets. Under 3G, Burger King began opening hundreds of stores in Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East. These stores were often new builds with updated interiors, modern equipment, and higher efficiency kitchens. This contrast was not lost on domestic managers. Photos of gleaming new stores in Brazil or Dubai would appear in internal newsletters or press materials. Meanwhile, the broiler in a Midwestern location still needed to be restarted with a butter knife jammed into a stuck sensor. The disconnect was obvious. Some managers joked about it. Others just sighed. Then came the digital wave. Fast food was going mobile. Customers were now comparing prices, reviewing meals in real time, and expecting seamless app integration. McDonald's had begun pushing its mobile platform and online ordering. Starbucks was leading the way with loyalty programs and in-app payments. Burger King, long behind in this area, scrambled to catch up in 2013. Burger King launched its mobile app with basic features: menu browsing, limited location info, a few coupons. Over the next few years, the app expanded to support mobile ordering, customizations, and rewards. For customers, this was progress, but for managers, it was a headache. Mobile orders added a new layer of complexity to operations. At first, only some stores were eligible, then others were added. The rollout was bumpy. Orders sometimes came in late. The system would freeze. Tickets would not print. Orders placed for one store accidentally routed to another. The interface changed with each app update. Training for these tools was minimal. Managers received emails with PDFs and were expected to explain everything to crew: how to verify app orders, how to handle no-shows, how to issue refunds. Some customers used outdated coupons. Others misunderstood what was customizable. And every mistake landed at the manager's feet. Digital loyalty programs also required back-end integration, meaning new reporting tools, updated register systems, and retraining of staff on how to handle point balances, expired offers, and duplicate redemptions. Drive-through headsets were upgraded to wireless systems. Some had voice recognition features. Others had buggy software. Managers had to reset them during service, often juggling 3 or 4 other responsibilities while trying to troubleshoot a frozen screen or pair a replacement headset before the line backed up to the street. Kitchens were also undergoing partial modernization. New prep tables were introduced to improve temperature consistency. Salad stations were redesigned. Fryer timers were standardized with countdown indicators. Digital thermometers replaced manual ones. All of this sounded helpful, and sometimes it was. But every new piece of hardware required training, calibration, maintenance, and record keeping. And none of it came with more staff, so the pressure grew. In addition to prepping orders, maintaining store cleanliness, managing labor costs, and responding to reviews, managers now had to monitor incoming mobile orders, oversee their preparation, timing, and ensure accurate fulfillment, all without disrupting the flow of in-person and drive-through service. There were more metrics to track: customer satisfaction indexes, app order success rates, loyalty program participation, mobile order fulfillment speed, coupon redemption rates, all of it visible to corporate, all of it measured, all of it compared to other stores, and all of it compiled into performance summaries that were sent to district managers and reviewed at monthly meetings. The human element did not go away. Employees still quit unexpectedly. Vendors still delivered the wrong product. A case of fries might arrive, thawed. A night shift might leave the store in bad shape. A key holder might oversleep. A register might lock up during a rush. A customer might demand to speak to a manager over a $1 upcharge, and the manager, still usually in a polo shirt, khakis, and scuffed black shoes, was expected to solve everything. On paper, the company was modernizing. On the floor, it was often still improvising. There were victories, small ones, a crew member who showed promise, a clean audit, a week with no complaints, a regular customer who complimented the team, a smooth close, a working broiler for a whole month, new chairs in the lobby, a drive-through headset that held a charge all day. But there was no time to reflect on them. The next LTO was coming, the next coupon batch was live, the next system update was scheduled, the next shift was short-staffed, and the same person would have to stay late to make sure it all kept moving. In 2014, Burger King was acquired again. This time, it was $11 billion merger with Tim Hortons, the Canadian coffee and donut chain. The new parent company was called Restaurant Brands International, or RBI. It was headquartered in Canada, owned largely by 3G Capital, and focused heavily on profitability through tight operational efficiency and franchise-led growth. In public statements, RBI executives spoke confidently of reinvention. They planned to modernize every brand under their control, standardize best practices, and push digital integration across the board. Internally, Burger King leaders began talking about the store of the future. This vision included self-service kiosks, minimalist interiors, sleek exteriors with black paneling, and streamlined kitchen layouts. Managers at existing stores were told to expect system upgrades, refreshed branding, and new digital tools to support operations, but the reality was slower and uneven, as it had always been. The Burger King of Tomorrow program began with new builds and high-performing remodels, mostly in urban centers or highway-adjacent locations. These stores were given touchscreen kiosks, flat-screen menu boards, digital ordering integration, and updated food preparation stations. Meanwhile, in older suburban stores, very little changed. The same broilers, the same tile floors, the same stockroom shelves made from worn aluminum, the same countertop freezers with lids that had trouble closing, the same prep sinks stained from years of hard water. A few locations got updated signage or a coat of exterior paint, but the infrastructure remained fundamentally the same. This created an operational split. Some stores were running the newest systems and testing mobile integration, while others were troubleshooting with fax machines and analog prep charts. For the general manager, this inconsistency made everything harder. Corporate expectations were now set to the highest benchmark. Stores without upgraded systems were still judged by the same metrics as the ones with brand new kitchens and full digital support. Mobile ordering had become widespread, but not every location had the equipment or staffing. Flexibility to accommodate a wave of app orders during lunch rush. Managers were expected to learn new software tools with minimal support. Each update arrived with login instructions, online modules, and downloadable PDFs. Some worked well, others crashed during peak hours. A manager might be expected to configure a new back-office reporting tool while also prepping trays for breakfast, handling interviews, or completing an inventory order. Mobile coupons had become common, sent via push notifications, email blasts, or digital loyalty programs, but the register systems lagged behind. Some coupons scanned, others had to be entered manually. Some were not programmed correctly and required overrides. Customers often got frustrated, crew got confused, managers were called over, and it was always the manager who had to make it right. In the midst of this tech wave, Burger King returned to what it knew best: menu reinvention. From 2015 to 2019, the chain rolled out a steady stream of new items and promotions: the extra long cheeseburger, the mac and Cheetos fried snack partnerships, the return of chicken fries, various international burger styles like the Angriest, Whopper, and the Farmhouse King breakfast burgers, grilled hot dogs, frozen Fanta, drinks, and, finally, in 2019, the launch of the Impossible Whopper, made with plant-based meat substitute from Impossible Foods. Each rollout was accompanied by advertising, new packaging, in-store training, and promotional deadlines. In the stores, this translated to logistical headaches. Every new product required new procedures: a new heating setting, a different fryer basket, a new bun, sauce, or ingredient that needed shelf space in an already cramped walk-in. Freezers were tight. Prep stations were at capacity. Crew needed retraining. Sometimes the new items sold out early. Other times they barely moved and created waste. The Impossible Whopper was the most successful launch in years. Customers asked for it by name. Some traveled out of their way to try it, but preparing it required care, grilling it separately, using special utensils, avoiding cross-contamination. Not every store had the tools. Some did not follow protocol. There were complaints. There were headlines. And again, managers were caught in the middle, trying to balance product integrity with throughput speed. Meanwhile, labor continued to tighten. Minimum wages were rising in many states, but Burger King's labor budgets were slow to adjust. Managers were asked to do more with less. Keep labor under 23%, then 21%, then 19%. Crew hours were trimmed. Prep time was squeezed. Expectations were not lowered. Recruitment became harder. Job seekers had more options. Delivery services like Uber Eats and DoorDash were siphoning potential applicants with flexible hours and independent contracts. Fast food was no longer the only fast-paced job in town. Many store managers found themselves short-handed daily. They scheduled skeleton shifts and hoped no one called out. When someone did, they covered it. They scrubbed bathrooms between lunch and dinner. They helped bag drive-through orders while answering the phone. They printed new allergen charts and posted the new promotional signage with the same 2 thumbtacks they had been using for 5 years. They kept their own schedules in notebooks. They tracked store birthdays and crew anniversaries even when corporate systems did not. They patched up tile with leftover signage. They wrote apology notes on the backs of receipt rolls. They trained new crew with patience that came from practice, not policy. And through it all, they were told things were getting better. RBI posted strong earnings. The brand was gaining global traction. The Impossible Whopper was hailed as a breakthrough. The store of the future was expanding. Customers were downloading the app, but in the older stores, the ones without sleek kiosks or flush drive-through windows, the ones still running with patchy tiles and a fry station from 2001, nothing felt all that different. There was still the early shift and the late shift, the weekly truck, the freezer that iced over on one side, The employee who showed promise, the one who did not, the line at lunch, the fryer timer beep, the drawer count, the quiet relief when the doors were locked and the floor was mopped. The systems changed, but the rhythm stayed the same, and every day the manager turned the key in the door and opened. March 2020 arrived with no warning. There had been whispers in the news about a virus spreading across Asia and Europe, cruise ships stuck at sea, flights grounded, a growing number of cases in major cities. But in most Burger King stores, the early days of March felt like any other month. Spring promotions were being printed. Managers were adjusting schedules for high school spring breaks. Freezer orders were placed. Oil was filtered. The line beeped. The headset buzzed. Life went on until it did not. In the second week of March, the shutdowns began, state by state, city by city. Governors issued orders to close dining rooms. Indoor seating was suspended. Mask mandates followed. Panic buying started in grocery stores. Office buildings emptied. Schools closed. And just like that, Burger King became something it had never been before. Essential. Fast food workers, long considered entry-level, were now frontline service workers, and store managers, already accustomed to long hours and thin resources, were suddenly tasked with keeping a public-facing business open in the middle of a public health emergency. The dining room was shut. The lobby was taped off. Tables were stacked against walls. Chairs were moved to the back. Floor decals were rushed in, marking 6-foot spacing for any walking customers. Mask signage was posted on the doors. The language changed daily. First, it was recommended. Then it was required. Then it depended on state or county law. Corporate sent out protocols, lots of them. Emails, PDFs, emergency guidelines, hand-washing procedures, mask usage, temperature checks, sanitizer stations, contactless payment setups, new bagging procedures, limited menus, revised schedules, and through it all, the manager had to interpret, implement, explain, and enforce, not once, but daily, hourly, person by person. Some employees refused to wear masks, others wore them improperly. Some customers got angry. They yelled about government overreach. They demanded to be let in. They refused to pull forward. Others thanked the team, left tips, offered kind words. Every interaction was unpredictable. Managers learned to expect nothing and prepare for everything at the same time. Staffing fell apart. Crew members stopped showing up. Some got sick. Others had family at risk and chose to stay home. Some stores lost half their team in a week. Hiring was nearly impossible. Interviews were cancelled. Job fairs were postponed. Unemployment checks were delayed, then increased, then extended. No one knew what came next. The manager filled the gap. They worked the grill. They handled the headset. They packed the drive-through bags. They took the complaints. They calmed the crew. They sanitized the counters. They printed updated protocol sheets from their own printer paper. They took temperatures. They cleaned the bathrooms after every shift, just to be safe. Personal protective equipment was a challenge in the first few weeks. Masks were scarce. Corporates sent small shipments, sometimes just a dozen masks for a staff of 15. Gloves were rationed. Hand sanitizer was ordered in bulk but rarely arrived on time. Some managers bought their own supplies at local drugstores. Some kept stashes in their cars. Some asked friends and family to sew reusable cloth masks. Training became impromptu and hands-on. There were no classroom sessions, no videos, just a short conversation before each shift. This is how we do it now. Wash your hands after every customer. Bag everything. Use gloves if you leave the kitchen. Sanitize the card reader every 10 minutes. These were not official trainings. These were battlefield briefings. Orders changed weekly. At one point, stores were instructed to seal all bags with stickers. The stickers arrived late or not at all. Some managers cut tape into small strips. Others folded the tops of bags over and stapled them shut. Customers complained. Some were grateful. Most just wanted their food and to go home. Meanwhile, sales patterns flipped. Drive-through volume doubled in some locations, with no dining room and limited indoor options elsewhere. Burger King became one of the few reliable food sources. Lunch rushes were longer. Dinner spikes were unpredictable. Mobile orders increased. Delivery partnerships with DoorDash and Uber Eats were expanded. But all of this brought new complexity. Delivery drivers waited in line. Some came inside without masks. Some took the wrong order. Others arrived before the food was ready and grew impatient. Managers had to learn new systems for coordinating app orders, packing items correctly, and ensuring that food went to the right person, not just the right car. And yet, in the middle of all this chaos, the standard systems remained. The food safety logs, the labor reports, the product temperatures, the inventory checks, the shift reviews, the customer feedback. Even if the store was barely staffed, even if the line was backed up, even if the manager had been on the floor for 12 hours straight, these systems expected completion. The reports still came, the district manager still called, and still the store opened. Even if the manager had to do it alone. The pandemic revealed many things. It revealed how fragile the system really was. It revealed who had been holding it together. It revealed that when the world shut down, fast food stayed open not because of policy, but because of people, and those people were led by managers who made it work, not because they were told to, but because there was no other option. Every day brought new rules, new stress, new risks, and still the headset clicked on. The fryer beeped. The bags were folded shut. The window slid open. The food went out, and the door locked again, late at night, when the manager finally finished cleaning the last touch point, alone, often unpaid for the extra hour, often unrecognized, often just relieved they made it through another day. By early 2021, the dining rooms began to reopen. The plastic barriers came down, slowly. The distancing stickers on the tile floor were scraped off one by one. Some stores reopened booths with reduced capacity. Others rearranged tables or kept some stacked in the corner. Corporates sent updated guidelines, revised checklists, reopening memos that contradicted the ones from 2 months before. Managers cleaned the lobby floors that had been unused for over a year. They dusted off tables, replaced light bulbs, discovered mold in mop sinks, reopened bathrooms that had been locked for months. Some were fine, others needed repairs. Toilets that no longer flushed, doors that no longer latched. But even with the physical space reopened, the workforce had not returned. Hiring was harder than ever before. Most former crew members had moved on. Some had found jobs in warehousing, delivery, gig work, or remote call centers. Others had left the workforce entirely. Entry-level labor was scarce, and the competition was fierce. Everyone was hiring, but few were applying. Burger King responded by increasing starting wages in some markets, offering referral bonuses, limited tuition reimbursement, and even signing incentives. But results were mixed. Applicants came, but often not in the numbers or quality needed. Interviews were scheduled and missed. Training sessions were half full. Many new hires lasted just days. The general manager became the hiring coordinator, the orientation facilitator, and the recruiter. They hung signs in windows, reposted job ads weekly, called back walk-ins who never answered, scheduled group interviews where only one person showed up, sometimes none. They stayed late to cover gaps, opened early when closers no-showed, promoted anyone who stayed longer than 6 months, because there was no one else. The pressure from above only increased. Restaurant Brands International, still holding the reins, announced a major rebranding strategy. In 2021, Burger King unveiled a retro-inspired redesigner, new logo, packaging, signage, uniforms, and ad campaign focused on food quality and heritage. The new slogan, "You Rule," corporate described it as a bold new chapter, a return to core values, clean design, updated interiors, stronger brand identity. For stores, this meant more changes layered on top of everything else. Updated signage had to be installed. New menu boards, new tray liners, new wrappers and cups. Some uniforms were switched out for brown, red, and orange shirts with large lowercase lettering. Stores received color-coded training decks, new mission statements, and reminders to use brand-consistent phrasing. But behind the new wrappers, the store experience hadn't changed much. The broiler still jammed, the ice cream machine still leaked, the prep table still had one corner duct-taped where the surface had cracked. The office computer still froze when too many browser tabs were open. The fryer oil still had to be filtered by hand every night. The headset still needed to be held together with rubber bands. What changed was how customers behaved. They were back, but they were tired too. More demanding, less patient, quick to escalate. Some expected touchless payment, fast mobile order, pickup, accurate loyalty point, redemption, and perfect customizations. Others walked in with frustration already in their voices. One wrong sauce packet, and it turned into a 5-minute argument. Managers handled it all. They checked the fryer temp, reset the soda machine, took the call about the wrong Whopper, refilled the register tape, set the breakfast pan rotation, interviewed a walk-in, gave a ride to a closing cook who missed the last bus, handed a kid a paper crown and smiled even when the headset was buzzing in their ear. Meanwhile, corporate rolled out Have It Your Way 2.0, focused on customization, digital engagement, and doubling down on flame grilling as the central brand identity. This meant new training videos, new mobile integrations, and more focus on the app. More metrics, more comparisons to McDonald's and Wendy's. Managers were expected to do performance coaching for new hires, keep up with labor law changes, and hold morning huddles even when the team was barely enough to open. Most had stopped asking for overtime approval. They simply worked the extra hours, quietly, without complaint, because if they didn't, the store would not open, or close, or clean, or stay on temperature logs for health inspections. And still, the audits came. Monthly district reviews, customer service audits, food safety checks, secret shopper reports, digital performance dashboards. Nothing had slowed down. And then came the supply chain delays. Chicken was short, paper bags were backward, soda syrups were missing from pallets, straws arrived in the wrong size, napkins were substituted with an off-brand, Managers had to call vendors directly, file incident reports, create substitutions, and explain to the crew why the condiments were now in packets instead of pump bottles. The rhythm of the store never changed. Early morning prep, first ticket, drive-through line, lunch peak, afternoon slowdown, dinner rush, close down, clean, manager paperwork, lockup, alarm code, dark lobby, dock repeat. The new brand was brighter, the new commercials were clever, but the reality stayed heavy. It always fell on the same shoulders, because, through every reinvention, one thing remained true. The store would not run without a person willing to hold it together. And day after day the manager showed up, put on the headset, turned the key, and opened. In the fall of 2022, Burger King made headlines again. The company announced a massive investment campaign called Brayclaim, the Flamer name that echoed the brand's decades-long emphasis on flame-grilled identity and the deep need to win back customers who had moved on. Backed by $400 million, the plan included $250 million for advertising and digital investments, and $150 million earmarked for franchisee support, remodels, kitchen equipment, and technology upgrades. Corporate called it a reset. A bold move, a vote of confidence in the future of the brand. For managers, it meant a familiar mix of excitement and fatigue. Because every time Burger King promised change, they were the ones who had to make it real. The first visible changes came in the form of in-store remodels, but only for some. Franchisees had to apply for support funds. Not all locations were approved. Some received budgets for new signage, updated kitchen layouts, or interior finishes. Others were told to wait, or received partial upgrades, POS stations but no lobby refresh, or a new grill without the ventilation upgrade needed to make it run at full speed where remodels did happen. They were disruptive. Construction crews worked overnight. Booths were removed. Walls were repainted. Floor tile was replaced in sections. Managers had to coordinate crew schedules around contractors, handle complaints from customers surprised by plastic tarps and construction smells, adjust drive-through flows when interior access was blocked. Inventory had to be moved from the usual places. Office files were temporarily boxed and stashed in supply closets. The reward, sometimes a brighter lobby, new menu boards, a reset soda fountain, but behind the front counter, many of the same issues remained. The same cold spots in the prep cooler, the same fry bin with the uneven heat, the same door that jammed on humid days. Alongside the physical changes came a massive advertising campaign. Commercials hit national TV again. Bold, modern, real ingredients. Flame grilling. New packaging. New wrappers. New taglines. A renewed effort to reposition Burger King as authentic, fresh, and competitive. In theory, this was good. Visibility helps. Traffic drives revenue. But, in practice, more traffic without more staff meant more stress on already overburdened stores. The push toward digital loyalty and app usage became relentless. Mobile offers, exclusive app-only deals, and points-based redemption systems became central to the strategy. Customers were encouraged to customize orders, schedule pickups, or order through third-party platforms for delivery. For managers, this meant juggling in-store, orders drive-through, orders mobile orders for pickup delivery, orders from multiple platforms, and real-time prep. Expectations from all of the above. The systems were often not synced. A mobile coupon might not scan. A DoorDash driver might arrive early or late. The line printer might jam mid-order. Customizations created confusion. Some burgers had to be remade. Some orders were abandoned. Some tickets came through twice. And, still, the same number of crew members were scheduled. Sometimes fewer. Managers adapted. Again, they created new flows. Labeled bags with Sharpies, taped printouts to the counter, updated, laminated quick guides, assigned one crew member to the tablet queue when possible, took the headset themselves when the trainee panicked, filed incident reports when the Wi-Fi cut out, stayed an extra hour to clean the walk-in after a chaotic dinner shift. The focus on efficiency deepened. Corporate distributed new scorecards. Stores were ranked against each other. Metrics included mobile order completion time, app participation, rates, customer satisfaction scores, and average ticket totals. Bonuses were tied to compliance. Franchise owners pushed harder. Some removed bonuses if standards weren't met. Others increased pressure for schedule optimization. One less opener, one less mid-shift. Cut prep time in half. Streamline everything. But the orders did not shrink. The customer expectations did not lower. The app timers still ticked. The drive-through monitor still tracked every second. And the human cost quietly continued. Managers were burning out. Quietly, consistently. Most did not say anything. They just adjusted. They bought energy drinks on the way in, took their break in their car, spent their own money on extra markers or batteries or a spare headset if the store's second one broke. They carried hand sanitizer in their pockets. They memorized workarounds. They coached crew members gently or sharply, depending on the day. They smiled for inspectors. They absorbed customer anger. They ran stores that were both open and exhausted. And yet, somehow, the stores stayed open, because every morning, a manager turned the lights on, turned the broiler on, turned the headset on. They managed. Through hiring droughts, through broken equipment, through promotional chaos, through corporate resets, through 17 different versions of what the brand was supposed to be. They had seen the king come and go. They had seen new uniforms, new menus, new slogans, and new owners, but the work was always the same. Prepare, staff, serve, clean, repeat. Whether it was 1985 or 2024, the experience had not changed as much as the commercials suggested. The smell of onions on the flat top, the screech of the printer spitting out, a rush of orders, the beep of the fry timer, the missing register key, the late night draw count, the first shift that shows up 10 minutes early, smiling, the last crew member who says goodnight and punches out without complaint, and the manager who stayed a little longer to finish what no one else would.